Indian hospitality sector is expected to grow at 16.1% CAGR to reach 2,796.9 thousand crore rupees in 2022. The sector encompasses several avenues including tourism, the food and beverage industry, the entertainment sector, transportation and several other service lines, which makes it an integral component of the wider economic growth engine. Among the several issues which concern the hospitality sector is ambivalence accorded to it from key policy makers, inadequacy of understanding the underlying operational challenges, and the external threats from physical and digital security barriers. Internally, one of the key issues has been on the skilling of the industry and standardization of the industry requirements.
There is a huge demand for more hotel rooms. In one recent survey, it says that by 2020 we need another 1 lakh room in India. And to manage those rooms, we need more trained and qualified persons. So the number of requirement of hotel trained qualified person for the industry reduced because of the automation will be raised by the need for more hotel.
To better understand these challenges and where the Indian hospitality sector is headed is what we will explore in this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India Risk Report. And this time we are looking at the hospitality sector in India and the challenges that it faces, particularly in the light of the fact that the hospitality sector is a huge revenue earner. It brings in substantial amount both of foreign exchange and money within the Indian economy into the sector, but the sector does face challenges. It has challenges to the women employees, which make up about 25% of the hospitality sector, but more importantly, it continues to be ready for challenges that terrorism that might spoil the party for our tourism industry. And we have two experts who look at the entire range of issues that concern the hospitality sector with us. We have Mr. Mandeep Lamba, who's Managing Director in India of JLL or Jones Lang LaSalle, the property company. And we have with us Mr. Rahul Pandit, who is also MD and Chief Executive Officer of Ginger Hotels, but also with the CII's National Tourism Committee. Mr. Pandit, I'll start with you. Now, there are several studies and reports that have been put together, and two of them caught my attention. One is the fact that about 7% or more of the country's GDP is linked to the hospitality sector. Now, is this an exaggeration? I'm told in 2018, it's not going to be looking that good. They're looking at 6 to 7%. So what would you attribute to the high ratio in the past? What would you attribute to the fact that we are not keeping up the momentum when we are all expecting the economy to grow more?
Thank you, Maruf, for pointing that out. Tourism contributes 6.7% to India's GDP. Now, globally, tourism contributes 10% to any country's GDP, and typically in mature economies, it could be as high as 11%. So, for India, tourism is actually a big spread opportunity to increase employability in the country. And over the next coming couple of years, whether you look at India's demographic dividend, whether you look at employability that the Prime Minister has been talking of, or whether you look at the country's opportunity to upsurge economically, this is a big driver which is actually waiting to be fully explored.
Truly, it needs to be fully explored, because I'm told on another note that Singapore, a country probably the size of one of our bigger cities, has more tourism than all of India has, and despite all the wealth of historical information and monuments and everything that we have to offer, I think it's an area that we can really scale up. But that I'll come back to you later. Mr. Lamba, now here is a question straight on to the area that you focus on. I have been told that it takes 70 to 100 permits before somebody can get a hospitality project going, because the permit Raj is still very active despite the government's best efforts, successive government's efforts and pronouncements that they're going to do away with red tape. And while it takes 2 years to build a hotel in Japan, it could take up to 7 years. So therefore, the money that has been accumulated for the project, it just lies there waiting for it to happen. Now, what can we do really to get over two issues here? One is the non-return on huge investments and the time and effort that goes into it, and people waiting with bated breath for 7 years is not a good thing. And the second thing is the possibility of various risks that money could face because of certain turmoil in the financial markets, or something else that may just stall the party for tourism. So how do we overcome that? How do we speed it up? If not 7 years, can't we talk of 4 years at least?
Maruf, you're raising a very, very pertinent issue. You know, the tragedy is that when I started my career almost 30 years ago, we were talking of exactly the same issue as we are talking about today. Every meet that I went to, we were raising the same issue of licenses. And the number you took, Maruf, is actually a little conservative. It can range from 70 to 150 various permissions depending on which state you're building, because besides the central permissions, there are also the state permissions. I think if I have, you know, for whatever, over the years we've studied this sector, I think what's really happening is that government after government has looked at the hospitality sector you know, as elitist, not really realizing that hospitality is really an infrastructure sector. Today, we are growing, the largest segment that is growing is in the economy and the mid-scale. And Rahul sitting here will vouch for me. He runs a business which looks after the economy and the mid-scale development in India. And these are infrastructure projects. If the economy is really going to grow at 8% or 9% or 7%, we have to have infrastructure of hotels. How do we grow the economy without growing the hospitality sector? And you said something about Singapore having more tourism than India. You may know, and a lot of our viewers may be surprised to know, that tourism arrivals in India are lower than tourism arrivals in many cities in the world.
True.
Shanghai, Las Vegas, a whole lot of other. We're touching about 8 million tourist arrivals now in India. But I think that beside, I think we have a phenomenally large domestic tourism sector. And if we can cater to the domestic tourism sector, which is now anxious to travel, which wants to travel, we have a huge potential of growth if only the government would do a single window clearance, which is done by many countries. Even a small country like Sri Lanka, where we work, you can get a single window clearance.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'd come back to, I mean, this is a very important point, but Rahul, I want to understand from you as a hotelier, what do you find are the big risk challenges that you face? Some of them I can highlight. The fact that, you know, there is a risk audit that's done, but at the end of the day, there are still big gaps in the security of hotels. Linked with that is the security of employees. Linked with that is also the security of the guests, because worldwide there have been cases of high-profile burglaries in hotels, high-profile attacks. So, I mean, in bullet points, how would you like to address this issue, and what steps do you think should be mandatory? I mean, you have a permit Raj which is not giving you permits for that. Can the permit Raj add a risk assessment and a risk audit as a mandatory requirement that you need to keep getting your permit renewed? Because in the interest of the employees and the guests, if nothing else, in the interest of making sure your investment continues to be on a good, solid ground.
So you brought forth a very good point. Now addressing actually your first issue of the permit Raj. So what Mandeep was saying, typically on an aggregate basis, there are about 74 permits or NOCs you need anywhere in the country. And 1/3 of these come from the central government, 1/3 come from the state government, and the last 1/3 come from the local municipal bodies, you know, maybe police and fire and so on and so forth. So managing this in itself, you know, needs a different sort of an organization. That's why this is a big invisible barrier to entry into India in itself. Now you said what are the other issues? Let's compare our industry to the industry globally. Globally, if you look at the world has about 28 rooms per 10,000 people. In India, that is just 2 rooms. And in the most mature market like US, it is 180. The other thing to look at is, like any other regular pyramid of supply, globally, the least supply sits at luxury, then increasing at upscale, mid-scale and economy. In India, it's an inverted pyramid of supply.
Right, right.
Our maximum is sitting at the top end and at mid-scale and budget, which is supposed to cater to the majority of the travelers, it is absent.
Okay, so I mean, again, we are deliberating on some very important issues, but purely because of paucity of time, we need to go in for a break. But we'll be back after a break, both to look at the financial challenges that the hospitality and the tourism sector faces in India, but equally importantly, what are the risks on a day-to-day basis that people in this industry face, but that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two distinguished guests with us. Mr. Lamba, Mr. Pandit was raising this point about, that the fact that the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, it has its own dynamics. But I think what we need to understand is, you as somebody who advises people in the property space, what would you be looking for to ensure that the investor in the property space who's entering the tourism or the hospitality business, what are the issues that you would highlight as a must watch to ensure that the risk that the person is taking is somewhat covered by the person who's going to receive the investment because of good practice?
Clearly, Maruf, I think one of the things that the industry is really reeling with, and one of our constant, requests to the government and presentations to the government, is that hospitality must be granted an infrastructure, status, in as much as borrowing and lending is concerned. One of the biggest risks to our industry is that while we are putting up these large projects and they provide a lot of employment, they bring in foreign exchange, they add to the economy, and they're contributing close to 7% of GDP, we are borrowing at astronomical figures. The average interest rate for borrowing is close to 12 to 13% in the hospitality sector, and we have a very short window for repayment of these loans. Typically, a hotel takes 5 years to build, another 3 years to stabilize, and we have normally just about 8 or 10 years to repay that loan. So one of the biggest things that we like to advise everybody is that your borrowing cost needs to be at a level which you can repay, and the amount that you borrow needs to be something that you can service clearly through the earnings that are envisaged from the hotel. So one of the big risk factors in hotels typically is if your debt to equity ratio is not in line with what it should be, and if you are borrowing money from various sources which is at a very high rate. So I think we clearly like to tell our investors what the threshold should be, and the financial planning of this is the only way you can avoid the risk.
Very good point. Mr. Pandit, now I'll go on, I'll digress a bit, and I'll ask a question which every time you go past a hotel or you enter the hotel, one of the things that hits you is from the gate onwards, there are security measures that have been put into place. Quite clearly after the 26/11 experience particularly, and the worldwide phenomena. But is that enough? Because my understanding is that what you see on the front gate is not quite what you see and what is happening at the back door. And that is where the hotels are vulnerable. Now, what I wanted to ask you, that like the media, which has taken some agreed steps on how to respond to terrorist attacks and how we should not compromise national interest while reporting a terrorist. There are some guidelines given by the government and agreed by the media. Are there some thumb rules that hotels as a rule follow other than opening the bonnet and the dicky of a car?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. Actually, Maruf, if you look at globally, today the security in Indian hotels, especially after 26/11, is amongst the best in the world today. Probably, only after Israel. And I can say with confidence that definitely in Southeast Asia, the Indian hotel security apparatus is very well geared, and actually a significant part of our capex investment today is in the security apparatus, equipment and people. But from the media, when you look at the sector, you are actually looking at two different sectors. One is the regulated and the branded sector, and the other is the unstructured or the unbranded market. So tomorrow, if there is a small incident, which may be happening in a guest house or a secluded place, that also gets blown up. Now, on the industry side, there are various bodies which consult and advise the government regularly, be it the Hotel Association of India or the Federation of Hotels in India. So there is a common code that is advised by the associations, plus there is also a common security protocol which each state necessitates that hotels have to put in. However, the risk is that hotels which are outside of these regulations, or the standalone properties or the guest houses or the unregulated market, security there poses, leaves questions to say, is it really safe to be using those premises?
Well, you're obviously advocating the case for regulated hotel industry because you're part of it, but I see your point, because I think the capacity to put security infrastructure in place is also depends on your financial volume that you churn out and your capacity to put it. So quite clearly a guest house cannot have that capacity, but I mean that's subject for a separate debate. Mr. Lamba, properties that are, I have myself, all of us in India, have seen a real boom in the hotel and hospitality industry over the last 20, 25 years, particularly in states like, say, Rajasthan, where there's a palace everywhere. And this is something which is drawing a lot of people into the country. How do you sort of take a call on what to project to your investors as against the sheer attractiveness of a property, because it happens to be, say, a palace, as against the financial viability of the project in the place that it is and the connectivity and all that goes with it to make that project boom? So because I have seen, for example, even where there didn't exist a palace, hoteliers have created palaces and given it the charm of something which was a few hundred years old just across the lake.
Maruf, I think, in India specifically, as compared to the more mature markets of the West, we in hospitality have a saying that, the ROE, which is the return on equity, in India is return on ego. So a lot of people build hotels because they want to own hotels. It's a nice, thing to be able to claim that I own a hotel in society, and they're doing it more for their own ego than necessarily for the financial feasibility of that model. Clearly at JLL, one of the largest things that we are involved in is doing feasibility studies and financial viability for hospitality projects. And we are very, very clear that the project must be financially viable, regardless of which location it is in or the lure of a particular kind of hotel. Our job is to tell our clients that this is what will work, and to advise them not to venture in something that may hurt them at some stage. Some clients are very savvy and would take our advice. Some may not, and still go on and do something that they feel in their own gut, regardless of what we may advise them, that this is something that I'd like to do, and go ahead and do it. And therefore, if you look at it today, Maruf, one of the large amounts of NPAs in banks are also hotels. And they're all going to be coming up now with the government tightening the noose on banks to declare NPAs, with the asset reconstruction companies now in play. There's a number of hotels which are lying in that dock, who've not been able to service their debts, who've been ill-planned, and gone against the advice on the feasibility of those projects. And
quite clearly, everybody is not taking your advice. But anyway, on a more serious note, Mr. Pandit, there are 2 or 3 issues that stick out in terms of management issues for hotels. One is that most of them, on an average in the country now, studies have shown, have about 25% plus minus of women employees. And there is a management issue there because their safety, their security is something the management is responsible for. The second thing is that apparently 11 out of 100 applicants who apply to the hotel industry have been shown to have adverse backgrounds, which could mean anything, but which is not a happy situation. So say about 10% the checks that are being carried out. Now the third point which is linked with that is that in the hotel industry, you are constantly stormed over by challenges that are coming to you through the e-challenge, which is through the hackers, through social media, through other things. Now, is there a blueprint in the hotel industry to take care of these three major challenges?
Okay. See, you've spoken of what are we doing for our women employees and how are we assessing people who are coming into recruitment. And the third is what are we doing on the social media and e-challenges. On the women employees, actually to me it's a very positive factor because compared to most industries where women employees are not in double digits, hotels and the regulated sector is considered very safe because the number of women employees could be 25 to 30%. On employees certification, we have processes in place including getting a due diligence from the local police authorities and also rating agencies to look at that profile. On the social media side, it's actually in the interest of hotels to ensure that they are engaged well on social media, not only for distribution, but also for data privacy and protection. And today, all major hotel companies have very solid policies and also a very solid backroom engine which protects their proprietary interests on the web.
Well, having heard both of you, a last quick word, Mandeep, because I mean we need to wind up.
Sure. Maru, I think coming back to what we were discussing a little earlier, is that I think the regulated sector, which caters to, depending on whose report you read, is about close to 250,000 rooms in India. There's an equally large enough sector, which is the unregulated or the smaller sector. And I think that is prone to a major amount of risk in all these sectors that you're talking about.
I mean, across the country in various businesses and various undertakings, there is an unregulated sector. And I think that's a big challenge for the government. But I think you have highlighted some very important points. As somebody who travels and uses hotels, I feel much more comfortable now having heard you out. And I think the steps are there in place. I think you all are working towards it. I think what you need is a little more of an open window from the government. On that note, I must thank you both for being with us. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.